And again, I would remind you that there's no First Amendment right to conduct. There's a First Amendment right to speech, and the things that we're targeting in the bill are not speech.
So right-wingers are mad about the idea of projecting something onto a building being considered a hate crime.
Again, if someone wants to stand across the street from my house and wave a sign on the sidewalk, they have every right to do that, and this bill won't have anything to do with that. But when it veers into conduct, and so the way we're going to approach this is through a hate crime kicker. So if you graffiti a building, it is a crime now. But if your motivation is hate, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in prison. If you want to litter, it's a crime right now. But if you litter and your motivation is a hate crime, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in jail. It is a crime right now to hang banners from an interstate. For obvious reasons, we don't want to distract drivers. But if you do that and you have a hate crime, a hate motivation, it will be a third-degree felony. You will spend 5 years in jail.
How optimistic are you of moving this bill along?
I guarantee the bill will pass. And I never do that.
So this video is very interesting because right-wingers are very upset about it. They're upset about the idea of their freedom of speech being violated by a bill that essentially equates projecting something onto a building as graffitiing on that building, and by adding a kicker to things like graffiti that allow for like hate crime charges to be put on it. Now, they're really angry about this because they think it's their free speech. But if you really think about it, it all kind of does make perfect sense. I mean, seriously. But the fact that right-wingers are angry about this, I think kind of speaks to something that we should all really acknowledge about what these right-wingers mean when they're talking about free speech. Because these people are not upset about like the Don't Say Gay bill or anything like that that's happening in Florida. No, they're specifically upset about bills that target hate speech. Now, golly gee, that's really interesting that they think that hate speech should be protected, but when they're taking books off of the library shelves in literal elementary schools, that's not a violation of free speech. And it just reveals exactly what we all should know at this point about the right wing, which is fundamentally they want their racism and bigotry to be protected, and they want everything else to be silenced. They do not want to hear people calling them racist. They do not want to hear people calling them transphobic or sexist or anything like that. In their mind, the worst thing you could possibly call somebody is bigoted in some sort of way. Well, they also want to reserve the right for themselves to say slurs whenever they feel like it. And this is one of those things where we just need to recognize that, like, yes, the things that you say and do are going to have consequences. And me personally, I am not a free speech absolutist. I actually think that we could afford to put in place a little bit more safeguards to make sure that the speech that's being spread around is not hateful, that there's not the violent conspiracy theories that are being spread around, because we've seen the impact, especially in this digital age, of false information and racist stuff and all of these terrible things spreading around the internet like wildfire, this outrage bait that is meant to stir people up and unfortunately has led to a lot of real world violence. So I think fundamentally it does make perfect sense to have a real conversation about hate speech and maybe reevaluate the things that people are allowed to say and do. Now, hate crime laws are something that are in some sense beneficial, but in my opinion, don't really go far enough, because you actually have to have prosecutors that are willing to take the case, and in that case, very often you need like very extreme and clear-cut examples. Otherwise, they might hesitate to put hate crime charges onto something. Then there's also the reality that a hate crime charge really only does something after the fact. It doesn't really do anything to stop the spread of misinformation and bigotry. It mostly just takes the most extreme actions done by hateful people and punishes those individuals for what unfortunately is a very systemic problem within the United States. And that's why the state of Florida putting this forward kind of doesn't really land as hard when you consider all of the effort that they're putting into to maintain systemic inequalities. And that, I think, really speaks to the ultimate Republican mentality, which is, as long as you use coded language, you can be as racist as you want to them, but heaven forbid you call them out as being racist. And sure, they might be willing to make examples out of people who are running around like explicitly using slurs and committing hate crimes, but they're more than willing to support the environment that leads to those hate crimes in the first place.